Hey everyone, welcome to my RSpec tutorial. Before I jump into the specifics of how to use RSpec, I want to go over the why you want to learn RSpec and how it can help you become a better software developer. In this great book, Effective Testing with RSpec 3, the foreword is written by someone named Tom Stewart, and he says this about RSpec. Well, the truth is, you can make software just fine without writing tests. And you can write tests just fine without using RSpec. So you'll be okay if you stop reading right now. But if you decide to keep going, you'll discover something interesting. Writing tests with RSpec is a great way to get really good at making software. That's because RSpec isn't just a testing framework. It's a tool for learning how to think critically, patiently, and systematically about the design of your code and how to make software in a methodical way so you have confidence that it's well organized, clear, and correct. Well, if that isn't enough to make you want to learn RSpec, I'm not sure what is. After I read that, I was so gung-ho about RSpec and I wanted to learn as much as possible. Now that you know why you should be learning RSpec, let's jump into some of the basic features of RSpec and write our first tests. If you don't have RSpec installed, you'll want to go to their website at rspec.info and we can follow along with their tutorial of how to install and set up RSpec. The first thing you need to do is generate a gem file in your project so you can install RSpec. Let's do that now. In our terminal, we can run bundle init in order to generate a gem file for us. After running that command, we now have this gem file right here. After we've initialized our gem file, we can go into it and add the RSpec gem. To add a gem, you just say gem and then the name of the gem. You can also specify a second argument that is the version of the gem to use. We're going to use this squiggly line operator, which basically says, get me any version of this gem that's greater than or equal to 3.0 and less than 4.0. Once we have that specified, we can save the file and then we can run this command in our terminal. We can run bundle bin stubs rspec-core. What this does is it installs RSpec and it also gives us this executable right here in our bin directory called rspec. This prevents us from having to run bundle exec rspec all the time, and we can just run /bin rspec. In the rspec docs, they actually run bin --bin stubs like this, but that's deprecated in bundler, and the recommended way to go is with this bundle bin stubs rspec-core, which is the new way to do bin stubs. Once we've run that bundle bin stub command, we now have an rspec executable in our bin directory. We can run that by saying bin/rspec-init. What this command does is it generates two files for us. It generates a .rspec file, which just requires this spec helper. You can put other tags in here, such as coloring and the way that RSpec prints out the tests. Also, it generates this spec directory and a spec helper. The spec helper is Ruby code, and it does a lot of configuration and setting up of RSpec. We now have everything we need in order to write our first RSpec test. Let's go ahead and create our first spec file and our first test. We'll go into the spec directory and we'll create a new file called bouncer_spec.rb. Now that we have our first spec file, it's time to write our first test. We'll say describe, and you can either pass a class here or a string. We don't have a class yet, so we're going to pass a string, and we're going to call it a bouncer. And then we're going to say our bouncer rejects XX's from entering the venue. And right now, if we were to run this, we will get a pending spec. Pending specs are great if you don't have any code, but you want to map out the behavior of your class before you've written any of the code for it. Now that we have our first spec, we can run it by using bin/rspec. What this command does is it looks in the spec directory and it runs every spec in there. Right now we just have the one spec. After we run that, you can see that it printed it out in yellow. That's because it's pending. A pending spec is a spec that does not have a block. And it just says bouncer rejects XX from entering the venue, not yet implemented. This is a great way to map out some of the behavior of your class before you've written any of it, and it helps remind you to go back and implement it later by marking them as pending. Now that we have this pending RSpec, let's go and create an actual spec that will fail. We can do that by providing a block to this if statement, and then we can say we'll create a new bouncer. Then we will say the bouncer will call the bounce method on it, and we'll pass in $x. And what we expect back from this is a true or false value, which we'll call bounced. And then we'll use an RSpec matcher. We'll say expect bounced dot to be truthy. Once we run this, we should get some errors, and then we can use TDD to go implement the behavior that we've defined in our RSpec. So let's run this with bin RSpec. And as you can see, we get our first error that's going to guide us in our TDD journey. So we got our first failure. It says name error, uninitialized constant bouncer. That's because we haven't defined a bouncer class in any of our files. So let's do that now. We'll go into our bouncer.rb file in our lib directory, and we'll create a class called bouncer. For right now, we'll leave it empty. We'll go back to our bouncer-spec.rb and we'll run those tests again. And it still says uninitialized constant bouncer, and that's because we haven't imported it into our file. So we need to do that at the top of this RSpec file. We'll require bouncer. Now once we save that and run the tests, we should get a new error. And we do. It says failure error bounced equals bounce b.bounce xx, no method error. So now we can go add that method to the bouncer class. Def bounce, and we'll just leave it empty for now. Okay, and then we'll run our specs again, and we should get another error. Okay, wrong number of arguments given 1, expected 0, so we have to take in a bouncy, and we'll save that, run the RSpec tests again, and we get a new value. We get a new error, which is we expected this bounce value to be truthy, and instead we got nil, which is perfect. So now we can start implementing this bounce method to make our tests pass. So we'll say if bouncy equals xx, return true, and then we'll return false if it's not xx. And we can get rid of these returns actually and just have it like this. So it'll return false if it doesn't return true. Now we can run our tests one more time, and they pass. At this point, we've gone through the entire TDD cycle. We've created a failing test, we added the behavior to make that test pass, and now we can refactor if we want to. But we don't really need to refactor because it's such a simple test that we've just created. Congratulations on writing your first RSpec test. You're well on your way to becoming an RSpec master and improving yourself as a software developer. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to leave a like and subscribe to my channel. I'm going to be releasing more RSpec videos in the future about let, before blocks, how to use more complex matchers, and other various advanced RSpec features. So if you're interested in any of those videos, make sure to subscribe, and if you have any questions for me, feel free to leave a comment down below. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll talk to you later.